Hey, how you doing? It's Tyson here. I thought I'd just kick off now by showing you a lot of the carvings that I did for the book Sand Talk. So if you read that book, you'll see that for every chapter, I carved that indigenous knowledge first into an object. A lot of knowledge from a lot of big yarns with old people from all over, and this is how our culture works. These are our texts. We have these visual things. We have dances. We have song, story. We have yarns, and all of our cultural practice is knowledge work. It's a way of storing all that memory, all that knowledge in objects, images, memory, deep memory. And so all these objects, I wanted to keep my thinking straight. I wanted to keep it in our way first. I wanted to make sure my thinking wasn't polluted by print, because print makes a mess of things. So I made all of these things, one for each chapter. There's a few more there. There's a few that aren't here because, these are things that, usually a big part of making them is about where they're going to go in our traditional economy, who they're going to go to in the community and what they're going to be used for, So a lot of the objects for the chapters, they've gone out to different people at different times. People who are keeping that knowledge that's there. How you doing? And it's a lot more than just what's written. The knowledge in the objects themselves. There's just, there's like 2 books in each of those things. So each chapter is really, it's a translation, of a fragment of the knowledge. It's not all the knowledge, what you're going to see written down in print there. Print is a problem. And I guess that's mostly what I want to talk about, how that process of writing the book in this way, some of the things I did to try and protect the knowledge and keep it in the right way, because there's a lot of problems with print. For a start, literacy, I know how important it is, which is why I've done so much work to get my own literacy up and make sure I'm fluent and really good at writing. But all that ever is, if we're talking about our knowledge, is just a rough translation of a fragment. Because our languages, English and Aboriginal languages, they don't really line up too well. There's a lot of words we have in our languages that just, there's no translation in English. And there's a lot of English words where there's just no translation in Aboriginal languages. So the language that I've been working in from my extended family in Western Cape York there, Wickwonkan, it doesn't have any abstract nouns. Abstract nouns like, racism, nature, society, things like this. So you can imagine the difficulties there. And, the way we deal with and express all these abstract concepts, is through different modalities, different ways of representing knowledge. And so, yes, that's in song, it's in story, it's in dance, it's in body paint, it's in paintings, it's in and of course, drawings, even just on the ground, which is something that traditionally has been practiced all over Australia by many or most of our first peoples in Australia. I was really influenced too with the idea of sand talk, by those practices in the Central Desert, but also Gamilaroi in Western New South Wales. Those mobs around there, they have a thing called a dumbai, which is a stick that's specifically for doing that sand talk, drawing in the ground. And it was used so much that everybody would carry a dumbai around with them all the time. Apparently, traditionally, because you'd use it all the time to get ideas across, about, land and story and abstract concepts. A lot of it is mapping as well. But then everything is a map, a story is a map. The land itself is a map. All of your memory and ideas and knowledge is a map. So for me, it was important to map these things first. So, a lot of drawing a lot of symbols, a lot of the symbols used in the book is from a Larrakia mob, Old Man Juma, up south of Darwin there. It was a lot of his big symbols that he talks up as a big story, big dreaming that goes all over and is for all people. A lot of the sand talk stuff, a lot of it is sort of secret, and it's only for, women's business or men's business or old people business or different ceremony, that kind of thing. And that's not to be shared at all, but then there's just common business for everybody. But even that, if you're doing a basic idea, there's still that protocol of you have to wipe that away off the sand first. I remember about I think it was about 2009 or 2008, would have been 2008. I was doing some of that and I didn't wipe it away straight away. And I did get growled for that because I'd left it there, And and I was just trying to show an image of different economic systems, So I was trying to show the shape of the Western or modern sort of liberal global economic system, and then the shape of traditional economic systems. So it wasn't like traditional ceremonial business or anything like that. But still, I got growled for leaving that there for too long after we'd finished. I did sweep it away, but you got to do it fast. So there's protocols, associated with all these sorts of things. And big protocols with carving those objects as well. The most important thing about Indigenous thinking is context. We have... very strongly, all of our thoughts are situated in a context, a big context of land and people and relations and politics and everything all at once. And mostly that context is shared among us, and a lot of it doesn't have to be spoken, but it's referenced and situated really intensely in that. So everything that we're looking at, what they call holistically. We're viewing these things through like a lens of complexity, and I often get that across with this way, that open hand representing our knowledge as the lens of complexity through which we're viewing the world, like that, through that cultural lens. But then the other way, the book way, would be this one. Like that book sign symbol there, holding your hand like you're reading a book. I think in a lot of sign language that means book or reading, is to do that. But usually all Indigenous knowledge is presented in books in this way, that it's viewing the culture through that lens of the book. So, that's all you're seeing. You're just seeing the edges of the fingers. You can't see it because it's through that that lens of print and English, and a very different way of looking at the world that's reductionist, that's just looking at one thing at a time. It's not seeing the entire context. So for me, the book was about turning that around and viewing the world and global knowledge through that lens, like that. So it was just this turnaround. So that, for me, that's the gesture that represents that. And that's another way we communicate a lot of abstract knowledge, is through non-verbal signals. A lot of our communication is like that. So they call Aboriginal cultures oral cultures a lot. But I think that's misnamed, because that suggests that most of our knowledge is conveyed through words. And it really isn't. Most of our knowledge is conveyed through non-verbal things. It's conveyed through a shared context. It's conveyed through images, movement, all kinds of things. But then, of course, these gestures, it's really important. And in fact, traditionally, we're fairly economical with our words. And there's that, of course, you must have heard 1,000 times, blackfellas saying, white fellas talk too much, so there's that idea, there's not that sort of verbal diarrhea. So to call our language oral, it's not quite enough. What it is more of just a non-print based culture. So there's print-based knowledge, and then, so of course, because the print-based culture here, that's the dominant culture, it's going to name everything and describe everything in the world in relation to that. And so it's going to call our culture that's not using print in the same way, it's going to refer to that as oral. But it's so much more than that. So for me, it was important to work with all the knowledge in the right way first, and in our way, so that I was seeing the world through that very complex way of Aboriginal thinking. The kinship and seeing the pattern of things and the story, but not just one story, but all the stories, that big aggregate combinatorials of stories, and all those stories interacting together, because that's only there where you can find that truth, and getting yourself into the right frame of mind to see that, which they refer to in science or as an alpha wave state. Lots of different terms they have for it, but you need to get yourself out of that. I know they call it mindfulness, a lot of that, but it's kind of a very sort of deep, timeless state of being and thinking, where you're able to do so much more with your mind. You have like an intense focus, but at the same time that focus is going outwards to all things, and you have to be in that state of mind. Our ancestors spent most of their lives in that state of mind. And when I say our ancestors, I mean all of us, not just blackfellas, everybody. Until very recently in human history, we were all thinking like this. That's how humans developed such a massive brain, was, through this kind of very big, very deep, very complex thought. We didn't evolve that by just sort of wandering aimlessly around the world, killing mammoths or whatever. That idea of the caveman is a projection coming from this print-based culture that assumes a model of progress. So there are some problems with print. I mean, one of them is just that it rewires your brain. To become literate is to rewire your brain in ways that are really inefficient. And you'll find this in the neuroscience backs this up. that the processes that occur in your brain, to be able to read something and write something, it's a very inefficient process and really highly abnormal, that has to circumvent the natural way your brain needs to work. And it's a bit of a killer of complex thinking if you're just stuck in that. So you need to express your ideas in a lot of different ways first, and preferably with a lot of different people, before you start putting pen to paper or reading up widely about the knowledge. That's a good thing to do, but I just don't think it should be the first thing you do if you want to keep your thinking sharp, if you want to keep your thinking capable of seeing complexity and finding complex solutions to complex problems. And arguably we've got a couple of complex problems in the world right now, so it's worth having a bit of a dance with that kind of thinking. Now there's a lot of problems with it. So writing was invented not very long ago. It came out of the Middle East region there. This tradition of writing, and the idea was control. So you had these first civilizations, coming out of that place there. And the idea of a civilization is that it's a community that needs to be constantly growing, or it'll collapse. And in order to constantly be growing, increasing, then it needs to be importing resources, because you can't grow enough on your land base to have a population, a community, an economy that is continuously growing. So you have to be going out and invading and stealing the lands of other people, because your own land turns into desert really quickly if you're being that extractive, which is why you see today, when you read the Bible, these places were all forest and really good pasture, very green places in the Bible. Now you go there and look and it's all desert, where these original civilizations were. And writing was a part of that. And it was about control, because they needed to control. They seized control of the present. They had to change time. So they seized control of the present moment. And in order to keep control of the present, they had to control people's understanding of the past, of how they got here, and tell them that the way people were living before was terrible and horrible. So they had these, so they used writing to rewrite the history, so people weren't telling the old stories anymore. All they could do was read or have read to them the new idea of the stories of the past, and that helped them to control the present. So there was this idea that this idea of progress was born, the idea that tomorrow can always be better than today. So they got all these people into these civilizations, and the civilizations are not very nice for people to live in. For most people, they're really great for the people at the top who are building the civilization, but they're not very nice for everybody else. So you have to keep reassuring people that tomorrow is going to be better than today. But also it's really important to let them know that today is a hell of a lot better than what yesterday was. Yesterday was terrible. You were just running around naked and cold, and it was horrible, and and everybody was dying and killing each other, and you need this rule of law, and you need this economy, and you need money, and you need to be working your cheeks off for the rest of your life. And there'll be a reward later, like down the track. Either after you die, you'll go to heaven, or, in the future, tomorrow's going to keep we got to keep working hard, and we'll have this progress. What went before was primitive. Where we are now is progress. So it forced time into a line. And in order to complete that line, you also needed to be able to control the future. So the past was controlled by written histories. The present was controlled by records, keeping records of everything that happened, but particularly every transaction that was made. So this started in, way back like Samaria and all those sort of places. And they started keeping all detailed records of financial transactions. That way you could control the way people saw that. You could hide some things and put other things out, and you could control those transactions in a way that you could create these monopolies so that the powerful were able to secure most of the good things that came out of the civilization for themselves, and distribute that among a sort of a middle class and a whole heap of middle management sort of people who would keep everyone else under control. But then they found that wasn't enough either. So the people at the bottom of the pyramid, most of the people in the society, they had to be able to give them somebody else to boss over, so that they would sort of more readily accept the idea of having a boss over them. And the idea that they might be able to climb that ladder and become the big boss themselves one day. So they gave women to men to boss around. They go, all right, well, men, you're now the boss of all these women. And so, even the poorest person in that society, it was like, well, if I've got a wife or a daughter or a niece, at least I'm boss over her, And of course, all of these civilizations depended heavily on slave labor. So you'd find that most of the population was slaves in the end. And I guess that was where the buck stopped. They couldn't be boss for anybody. So, you'd threaten them with crucifixion or whatever. Every now and then you'd kill one of them in a horrible way just to remind the others. But it's hard to police people like that. It's a lot of energy to keep policing these slaves. So what you do is you get them to police each other. You give them rewards for dobbing each other in. You get them to do a bit of lateral violence to each other. And so instead of looking upwards to their oppressors, they're looking side to side. So anyway, that's how you control the present, and largely through that print. And you attempt to control the future with print. And that's done with contracts. So where you lock somebody into a contract. So people have to sign these agreements, and if they break the agreement, then they're breaking the law. You have financial contracts, legal contracts, all these sorts of things, where you can guarantee that somebody will have to do something in the future. So you control past, present, future, and then suddenly you change what time is. You make time run in a straight line, and you get this arrow of time. So effectively, print changed not only the way people organized themselves or governed themselves, but it also changed the way of thinking. It changed the way of thinking to be, focused on just reductive little points. Just, we're looking at this thing, and they're not seeing the big context. Because the powerful don't want people to see the big context, because people would go, hey, this is all wrong, we're not doing that. We're all working our cheeks off and it's just all going to you. Stuff that, I'm going home. So you don't want people thinking like that. So they made sure everybody had a very narrow focus of reality, and they knocked people out of the big cycles of time and the big complex, eternity of time that everybody has lived in through most of human history. And they put them all on this line, so you're only ever focusing on one point of it. And it messes with the way you think. So for me to go, well, how can indigenous thinking come up with some useful ideas about the world? I couldn't be on that arrow of time, and I couldn't be just focusing on one problem at a time or one aspect of one problem. I needed to see the entire picture, so I had to have that pattern thinking, pattern logic, that complex logic that's afforded to us through our cultural practice, and most importantly through our relationships with people and with land and place and all these things. And arguably it's the one part of our culture that that hasn't been eradicated. So you could be the most disconnected person and have no language. You might not know how to play shake a leg or do anything like that. You don't have the paint and the feathers. You don't have all of that. You're not going hunting. You're in a business suit. But still you have that. You still inherit that way of thinking. And, you might be using different things that would be completely unfamiliar to people from even 100 years ago. But you're still working with those things in the same way. You start to lose that, though, if you lose yourself in print. I'm not saying don't learn to read and write and don't master those codes. Yeah, do that, but you do the other things first. And so you see Auntie when she's at the shops and she's got to try and figure out how to make, $150 stretch to feeding 12 people for a week. She doesn't have a shopping list with her, and if she does, she doesn't look at that until the end. She's more, she's operating in a completely different way in that supermarket. And you watch her, she'll be going around all over the place. She's not just following the aisles down. She's not going down those lines. She's whipping around like a honeybee all over the place because she's thinking about, how she's going to do all these meals for all these people. It's the same way. And she'll do the print thinking last, So it's good to do your own way first. And so that's the way I worked with writing this book, this Sand Talk. Everything was situated in places and yarns and drawing things on the ground, 1,000 of these things, and then carving all of that into those objects, sitting for a very long time, not using any machine tools, but just chipping away at those boomerangs, shields, kulamons, stone axe, everything, for a very long time. So it was about 20 years of lots of big yarns, and then and a lot of cultural practice, a lot of talking to people from all around the world. But then it was about 2 years of carving the objects. And it's funny, the writing part is easy after that. If you already have the knowledge and you're not trying to think and write at the same time, if you're just typing it out, then the book takes just as long as it takes you to type those words. So for me, writing up the actual book only took 2 weeks. That was the easy part because I just had to type it all out. It wouldn't have even taken that long. It would have taken a few days, except I had to decide what to share and what not to share, and that's the trickiest thing, because there's a lot of knowledge in there that is not for just anybody. A lot of it's specific for age and gender and different mobs, specific to their own special places, and they want to keep that to themselves. So you choosing what to share, but then choosing even what can be shared. A lot of things just can't be translated into English print, so you got to work very hard at that. So I tried to find a lot of ways. I even had to invent a few new words. So I decided, in order to make a relationship with the reader, to make some kind of feeling of a connection with them, like a kinship pair almost, that the English didn't work for that. So I thought, well, we have those pronouns in Aboriginal languages that have different kinds of I, you, me, them, all that kind of thing that just don't exist in English. So I wrote a lot of the book in this us two, the two of us both fla. Us two. So I kind of just invented that word in English because it doesn't exist in English. So I just made one up. Went, well, that lines up better with our word, us two, the two of us. So I tried to bring that reader in that way, and that way I'm kind of sitting with the reader, talking to the reader, The problem with that was the expectation for this book was that it would only sell maybe 1,000 copies or something, that it would be a very small thing, and that I'd be able to manage those relationships. But instead it's really taken off, so there's like, tens of thousands of people reading this book, and now it's in the United States, and God knows how many people are going to read it there. So I'm struggling a bit to manage all these relationships. Apart from that, it's doing all right.